They say power doesn't change people, it only reveals who they truly are. For Diane Brooks, that truth came wrapped in a glittering engagement ring and a wedding invitation that never arrived. Diane had raised her son, Marcus, through every storm life could throw at them, working double shifts, sacrificing her own dreams so he could have his. She thought nothing could break the bond they shared. But then came Camille Preston, an influential public relations executive celebrated on magazine covers and social media, adored in the circles where champagne flows and names open doors. With her flawless smile and razor-sharp charm, Camille wasn't just marrying Diane's son, she was marrying into control. And with the ease of someone who had done it before, Camille made sure Diane knew her place. Not beside her son on his wedding day, but far away, watching from a screen like an unwanted spectator. What Camille didn't know was that Diane had survived worse than snobbery wrapped in designer silk. She had faced poverty, loss, and the quiet cruelty of being underestimated her whole life. And when fate handed her the perfect opportunity to turn the tables, Diane wouldn't just take back her dignity, she would bring Camille's perfectly curated world crashing down. If you've ever faced someone who thought their power made them untouchable, you'll want to hear every word of this story. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss the twists. Like this video to help more people hear it. And let me know in the comments what you would have done in Diane's place. This is the story of how a mother with nothing left to lose stood up to the most powerful woman in her son's life and walked away stronger than ever. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. No subject line, no pleasantries. Just Camille Preston in the sender field, a name that carried weight in elite circles. A name Diane Brooks had learned to say with the same caution one uses for a loaded weapon. She clicked it open, expecting perhaps a schedule for the rehearsal dinner or an update on the floral arrangements. After all, the wedding was only weeks away. Instead, the message was short, cold, and calculated. Diane, after careful consideration, Marcus and I have finalized our guest list. Due to space limitations and our desire to keep the ceremony intimate, we've decided you will not be attending in person. We've arranged for a live stream link so you can still be part of the day. Camille, no dear Diane, no warmth, no apology, just the polite brutality of a social execution. Diane stared at the screen, her coffee cooling in her hand. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She simply let the words settle into her chest like stones sinking in water. Camille Preston, the woman who graced charity gala covers, who posed with senators and tech moguls, had just told her that after raising Marcus alone, after putting him through college, after co-signing the loan that helped him buy his first home, she wasn't good enough to witness his vows in person. A live stream link, a glorified spectator seat. For a mother, it wasn't just exclusion. It was a message. Know your place. The cruelest part wasn't even that Marcus hadn't sent the message himself. It was that he had let Camille speak for both of them. In Diane's mind, that said everything she needed to know. She closed the laptop slowly, deliberately, as if sealing away a wound she wasn't ready to examine. Her phone buzzed once, twice. Camille again. This time, a calendar invitation to join the wedding livestream. The gall, the arrogance. Diane pushed the phone aside. She wouldn't answer, not yet, because beneath the hurt, something was stirring, a quiet, steady resolve. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew one thing. She would not let Camille Preston decide her worth. The first time Diane met Camille, she felt like she had stepped into another world. The restaurant was the kind that didn't bother printing prices on the menu. Polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, waiters who spoke in hushed tones. Diane had worn her best navy dress, the one she usually saved for funerals or Christmas service. Camille arrived in a silk pantsuit the color of champagne, tailored so perfectly it seemed part of her skin. Marcus had introduced them with boyish pride. "Mom, this is Camille." Camille's smile was flawless, warm enough for a photo, cold enough to keep her distance. Her handshake was light, fingers barely grazing Diane's. And when she spoke, it was with the easy confidence of someone who knew the room was hers. It started small, little remarks, brushed off as harmless. "Oh, Diane, I adore your dress. So vintage. You raised Marcus on your own?" That's admirable, admirable. The word hung in the air like a pat on the head. Diane noticed how Camille always seemed to position herself higher, physically and socially. At dinner, she'd order for the table before Diane had a chance to speak. At gatherings, she'd lean in to whisper something to Marcus, excluding Diane from the conversation. Every time Diane tried to connect, Camille would smile politely and redirect the topic to a trip she'd taken, a celebrity she'd met, or a high-profile event she'd attended. She wasn't cruel in the obvious way. She was worse. Camille mastered the art of polite diminishment, a constant reminder that she belonged to a higher tier of society, and Diane was only visiting. Marcus, blinded by love, seemed oblivious. He would beam whenever Camille recounted stories of her high-profile PR clients or her work with political campaigns. Diane would sit quietly, sipping her water, wondering if Camille ever realized her tone made Diane feel like a relic from another era. It wasn't until the engagement party that Diane realized just how deep Camille's influence ran. That night, Diane stood by the buffet, talking to one of Marcus's college friends, when she overheard Camille in the corner with a group of guests. The laughter was soft but pointed. Camille's voice rose just enough for Diane to catch a few words. "She's sweet, but she doesn't really get this lifestyle. I mean, Marcus and I come from different worlds. She'll understand it's better for everyone if we keep things simple." Diane felt her stomach twist. Keep things simple. That was Camille's polite way of saying, keep her out. In that moment, Diane understood. Camille wasn't just marrying Marcus. She was building a kingdom, and Diane didn't have a seat at the table. Long before Camille Preston entered their lives, Diane Brooks had been fighting battles no one saw. Her story wasn't glamorous. It didn't unfold in luxury hotels or sunlit boardrooms. It was forged in the cramped kitchens of rented apartments, in the fluorescent hum of late-night shifts, in the quiet moments when she told herself tomorrow would be better. Marcus was barely 2 when Diane's husband walked out. No explanations, no forwarding address, just a note that read, "I can't do this anymore." From that day, Diane was both mother and father, breadwinner and comforter, the steady anchor in a storm she hadn't asked for. She worked wherever she could, waitressing at dawn, cleaning offices at night, taking data entry jobs from home while Marcus slept in the next room. The bills didn't care that she was exhausted. The rent didn't pause when she was sick, so she kept going, one paycheck at a time. College had always been Marcus's dream. When acceptance letters came, Diane didn't hesitate. She emptied her small savings account, picked up extra shifts, even sold her mother's antique locket, the only piece of jewelry she had worth more than sentiment, just to cover his first semester. There were years when Diane didn't buy a single new outfit for herself. Years when she drove the same dented sedan, its heater barely working, because every spare dollar went to Marcus's textbooks, meal plans, and rent. When Marcus landed his first real job, an entry-level position in a downtown marketing firm, Diane celebrated like it was a national holiday. She took him to a steakhouse she couldn't afford, smiling as he ordered without checking the prices. That night, she slipped him an envelope with $1,000 inside. "Just in case you need a cushion," she said. He hugged her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. Years later, when Marcus decided to buy his first condo, the bank required a co-signer. Diane didn't blink. She signed her name on the dotted line, tying her own financial security to his future. And when he introduced Camille, Diane thought, finally, someone to love him as fiercely as I have. She had no idea that the woman shaking her hand that day would one day tell her, in so many words, that none of it mattered, that her years of sacrifice could be reduced to a live stream link. But Diane remembered every long night, every sacrifice, every time she put herself last so Marcus could be first. And she knew, if Camille thought she could erase that history, she was in for a surprise. It happened at a charity luncheon, the kind Camille seemed to glide through effortlessly, like she owned every square inch of the room. The ballroom sparkled with gold-rimmed glasses and white linen tables. Waiters weaved between guests balancing trays of champagne. The event was in support of an arts foundation Camille had been working with for years, and Marcus had insisted Diane come along. Diane had been nervous, unsure what to wear, finally settling on a modest black dress with a pearl necklace. She arrived early, hoping to avoid the awkwardness of walking into a crowd already deep in conversation. When Marcus and Camille finally swept in, Marcus in a tailored navy suit, Camille in a backless emerald gown, the room seemed to pause. Heads turned. Conversations softened. Camille smiled like royalty acknowledging her subjects for a while. Diane stayed close to Marcus, listening as he introduced her to colleagues and acquaintances. But soon Camille drifted over, sliding seamlessly between them, her manicured hand on Marcus's arm as she guided him away to greet people who really need to meet. U.S. It was subtle at first, leaving Diane in small circles, where conversations revolved around vacations she'd never afford, art collections she'd never understand. But then Camille took the microphone. Before we begin, Camille said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, I'd like to thank my incredible fiancé, Marcus Brooks, for supporting me in this event. And to my wonderful future family who are watching from home, we wish you could be here in person. The words hit like a slap. Watching from home. She wasn't just talking about relatives overseas. She was talking about Diane, standing right there in the audience. A deliberate erasure in front of 200 people. A few heads turned toward her. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. One woman gave Diane a sympathetic smile, the kind people reserve for strangers at funerals. Marcus didn't correct Camille. He didn't even glance her way. For the rest of the luncheon, Camille treated Diane like an afterthought, introducing her vaguely as Marcus's mom, before steering the conversation back to her own accomplishments. By the end of the afternoon, Diane's cheeks ached from forcing smiles. She left quietly, without saying goodbye. In the taxi ride home, she replayed Camille's voice over and over. We wish you could be here in person. It wasn't just exclusion anymore. It was humiliation, staged in front of an audience, wrapped in a bow of false graciousness. And Diane knew then that whatever Camille's next move was, it wouldn't be her last. The days after the charity luncheon were eerily quiet. No calls from Marcus. No hope you got home safe from Camille. It was as if Diane had been erased not only from the guest list, but from their daily lives entirely. And Diane didn't chase them. Not this time. She didn't text Marcus to say she'd enjoyed seeing him. She didn't send Camille a polite thank you for the invitation. Instead, she let the silence stretch, taut and unbroken. At first, it wasn't a strategy. It was simply exhaustion. Years of bending herself into smaller shapes to fit into their world had left her with nothing more to give. But as the days passed, Diane noticed something interesting. Her phone began to buzz. Once, twice. Missed calls from Marcus. Short, perfunctory texts, hey mom, you okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Then came the group messages, event reminders, a photo of the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner, Camille's voice weaving through the thread with instructions about color schemes and floral arrangements. Diane stayed silent, and that silence began to work on them. A week later, Marcus finally left a voicemail. Mom, Camille feels like maybe you're upset. If it's about the luncheon, you know she didn't mean anything by it. We're just trying to keep things organized. Give me a call, okay? Diane listened once, then deleted it. What Marcus didn't understand was that her silence wasn't about wounded pride. It was about reclaiming ground she'd been pushed off of for too long. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, was a small act of resistance, a way of saying, I'm not going to fight for a place at your table anymore. And in that quiet, Diane began to think about the one thread still tying her to their grand wedding plans, a thread Camille didn't even realize could unravel everything. She smiled to herself. It was time to pull it. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when Diane finally acted. Rain streaked the office windows as she sat at her desk, flipping through a stack of paperwork that suddenly felt meaningless. Her mind wasn't on contracts or invoices. It was on the wedding. More specifically, on the $45,000 she had promised to contribute toward it. Money that wasn't just a number in a bank account, but decades of sacrifice distilled into a single figure. It was supposed to pay for the catering, the open bar, and part of the venue fee at the sprawling lakeside estate Camille had insisted on. Diane had transferred the initial deposit months ago without hesitation, believing, back then, she was part of this celebration. Now, she was a spectator. At 4:15 p.m., Diane slipped on her coat and walked the few blocks to her bank. The air was damp and cold, the kind of weather that made people hunch their shoulders and hurry along. But Diane's steps were steady. The branch manager, Mr. Reed, greeted her warmly. Double quotes, Mrs. Brooks, good to see you. What can I do for you today? Diane sat across from him, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Her voice was calm, almost serene. I'd like to cancel a scheduled transfer, Mr. Reed tapped on his keyboard. Which one? The one for Lakeshore Estate. $45,000. His fingers paused. It hasn't processed yet. You're just in time. Are you sure you want to cancel? That's a significant amount. Diane met his eyes. I'm sure. He nodded slowly, printed a confirmation form, and slid it across the desk for her signature. She signed without hesitation. Walking back out into the drizzle, Diane felt lighter. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. By the time she returned home, her phone was lit up with missed calls from Marcus. One voicemail caught her eye. Mom, please tell me you didn't just cancel the payment. We need that money. The caterer's already been booked. If we don't pay, they'll walk. Diane set the phone down without listening to the rest. It was no longer her problem. For the first time in months, she poured herself a glass of wine and watched the rain slide down her window. She imagined Camille opening her email to find the payment hadn't come through. She pictured the smile fading, the panic setting in. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, Diane smiled. The first call came less than 24 hours after Diane canceled the payment. Marcus's voice was tense, the kind of strained calm that always meant he was barely holding it together. Mom, I need you to call me back. Now. The venue says they haven't received the balance. The caterer's threatening to cancel. This isn't funny. Diane didn't respond. By evening, the messages doubled in urgency. We have 48 hours before they release the date to someone else. Camille's furious. She says this is going to ruin everything. And then, at nearly midnight, one final voicemail. Camille herself. Her voice was icy, stripped of its usual polished charm. Diane, I don't know what misunderstanding has happened here, but the wedding is in serious jeopardy. The caterer is already backing out. The florist says they need payment in full, and we cannot find replacements this close to the date. I need you to fix this. Call me back immediately. Diane poured herself another cup of tea and let the phone buzz in the background. The next morning, she imagined their apartment, papers strewn across the dining table. Camille pacing in her silk robe, Marcus frantically scrolling through vendor contracts. She could see it so clearly, Camille barking orders at assistants, calling in favors, but hitting brick walls at every turn. By mid-afternoon, Marcus showed up at her door. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, eyes shadowed. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Why are you doing this? He demanded. Doing what? Diane asked softly. Canceling the payment. You know we can't cover that amount on our own. Diane leaned against the doorway, her expression unreadable. Marcus, I promised that money when I believed I was part of this celebration. I was wrong. It's still my wedding. He shot back. Don't punish me because you don't like Camille. Her gaze didn't waver. This isn't about liking or disliking her. It's about respect. And you both made it clear I wasn't welcome. Marcus's jaw tightened. For a moment, Diane thought he might argue. But instead, he shook his head and muttered, You're making a huge mistake. She closed the door quietly behind him. The pounding in her chest wasn't fear. It was the strange, exhilarating rush of standing her ground. It was early evening when the knock came, sharp, deliberate, and far too controlled to be Marcus. Diane opened the door to find Camille Preston standing there, framed in the fading sunlight like she'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, tailored camel-colored coat. The picture of composure. Only her eyes betrayed her. They weren't warm. They weren't charming. They were cold steel. May I come in? Camille asked. You may, Diane replied evenly, stepping aside. Camille walked in as if she owned the place, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She didn't sit. She turned to face Diane directly. I think you know why I'm here, she began. You've put us in an impossible position. The caterer is gone. The florist refuses to hold our order, and the venue is already taking calls from other clients." "That sounds unfortunate," Diane said, her voice calm. Camille's brows knit. "Unfortunate? Diane, this is my wedding. This is Marcus's wedding, and you're jeopardizing it over what? Some imagined slight." "Imagined." Diane's voice sharpened, just slightly. "You disinvited me from my own son's wedding. You told me to watch it from a screen. That wasn't imagined, Camille. We had to make tough decisions about the guest list." "No," Diane cut in. "You made a decision to put me in my place, to remind me I'm not part of your world." For a brief moment, Camille's mask slipped. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her nostrils flared just slightly. "This wedding is happening," Camille said finally, her tone clipped. "With or without your approval. And if you think holding the money hostage is going to stop me, you're wrong." Diane stepped forward, close enough to meet Camille's gaze head-on. "It's not about stopping you, Camille. It's about no longer funding my own humiliation." The air between them felt electric, charged. Neither woman blinked. Finally, Camille turned on her heel and walked to the door. "I'll remember this, Diane," she said over her shoulder, her voice cool and precise. "I'm counting on it," Diane replied. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Diane alone in the stillness. She exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady. Her voice had been steady. And in her chest, there was no regret. In the days that followed, Diane didn't have to imagine the chaos. She could hear it in the hurried, clipped voicemails Marcus left, in the desperate tone of the few text messages Camille sent before going silent altogether. The cracks were spreading faster than either of them could patch. The caterer had moved on to another event. The florist sold their blooms to a different wedding party. The high-end string quartet Camille had bragged about, gone. And the lakeside estate, the venue Camille had handpicked for its sweeping views and elite exclusivity, was no longer holding their date. There would be no grand aisle framed by ancient oaks, no champagne tower under the chandeliers. Camille tried, of course. She called in favors, tried to leverage her professional connections, but the short notice and high season meant every venue worth their reputation was already booked. The best she could manage were overpriced, underwhelming alternatives. Marcus, once buoyant with excitement, was now curt and distracted. When Diane passed him in town by chance, she barely recognized him. His suit was wrinkled, his expression tight, his phone glued to his hand as he muttered into it about backup plans and cutting guest numbers. And Camille avoided her entirely. No calls, no messages, just silence. Through mutual acquaintances, Diane eventually heard the news. The grand wedding had been abandoned altogether. In its place, a small backyard ceremony at Marcus's condo, attended by a scattering of relatives and a few of Camille's closest allies. No headline-worthy venue, no society column coverage, no spectacle. It was the kind of wedding Camille would have scoffed at just months earlier. Diane didn't attend. She wasn't invited. But this time, she didn't need to be. While Camille's wedding day unfolded in muted compromise, Diane sat on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching the late afternoon light spill across her garden. There was no gloating in her heart, no hunger for vengeance, only a deep, steady satisfaction. Camille Preston had built her kingdom on control, and Diane had taken back the one thing that could shake it, and shake it she had. Weeks passed. The whispers about Camille's scaled-down wedding faded into the background noise of the town. People moved on. But for Diane, the change wasn't just in the headlines, it was inside her. For years, she had measured her worth by what she could give money. Sacrifice. She had convinced herself that love meant enduring every slight, forgiving every cut, so long as it kept her close to the people she loved. But this had been different. For the first time, she hadn't bent. She hadn't begged for a seat at a table where she was clearly unwanted. Instead, she had stood tall and walked away. There was a peace in that decision she hadn't known she was missing. Mornings felt lighter. Her home felt warmer. Even her reflection in the mirror looked different, as if her posture had shifted, her shoulders free of a weight she hadn't realized she carried. Marcus hadn't reached out since the wedding. Camille, predictably, stayed silent. And while the old Diane might have ached for that phone call, the new Diane understood something far more important. If your presence is negotiable, then so is your effort. She spent her days reading novels, taking long walks, joining a pottery class she'd always put off. She met friends for coffee, laughed more, lived more. She began to see her life not as something that happened in the margins of others' stories, but as her own. Looking back, Diane knew Camille had thought her power was absolute, that her influence, her status, her connections could bend anyone to her will. But Camille had forgotten one thing. True power comes from knowing when to say no. Diane had said it and meant it. If you've ever faced someone who believed their status gave them the right to walk over you, remember Diane's story. Stand your ground, protect your dignity, and never be afraid to close the door on anyone who refuses to see your worth. If this story spoke to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Like this video to help others hear it, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would have done in Diane's place.